Good afternoon and welcome to the April meeting for the Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority. We are all here except for Elaine, who is going to be joining us via Zoom. So we'll probably hear a little blip when she calls in. She can see all of us, only Jeffrey can see her. We have lots of guests today and presentation. And as you can see, we all have our name tags, so you know who we are, and you can refer to us any way you want. Next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes, which I hope everyone has had a chance to review. I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the minutes for the monthly meeting of the ICA on March 22nd, 2023.
Move.
Second? Second. Any comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. I have very brief comments today as I want to make sure we have plenty of time for our agenda items. Last month, I shared that the audit should be completed by the end of April. That is not the case. We are now looking at the end of May for the FY21 audit. City Council did hold its hearings on the uses of the American Rescue Plan dollars that the city recommended. We are awaiting City Council's report on that finding. They canceled last night's session, so perhaps they were busy working on that response. The main topic of this meeting today is the city's economic development plan, which will be presented by Jason Graves. Jason shared the draft of the report with us late last evening, and we look forward to his comments because I'm sure we didn't have the time to read it in detail. From the very first time we met as an ICA board, economic development was a key concern for us. In 2019, it was imperative for the city to develop strategies to attract more residents and businesses to the city, to raise revenue, to replace the temporary taxing authority that had been granted. Fortunately, in 2020, the legislature approved permanent taxing authority for the city's EIT rate and temporary extension of the LST tax. That gave the city some breathing space. However, looking at the budget forecast, there remains an immediate need to find ways to attract and retain residents, attract, cultivate, and retain businesses, and to attract tourists. We're glad that the city is dedicating talent and time to these issues. So with that set up, I'd like to turn it over to Jason. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself. I know you're new. I don't know how new, but if you could share that with us. And then if you don't mind, after you give your report, I'll open it up for questions.
No problem. Jason Graves. I am the Director of Business Development for the City of Harrisburg. Working in the Economic Development Department along with Steve Hill, who is our Economic Development Director.
Who is in the audience?
Who is in the audience?
As moral support.
Yes. So where do I begin? What you have in front of you is a draft. So there are going to be open-ended things that are actually going to have to be filled in as far as with stats, some numbers, and also visual aids. I broke everything down to as minimal as possible to get not into any details. The point of how I came up with this actual strategic plan was to open it up for basically plans to go into each individual section, because everything's going to have to be more detailed. If not, this probably would have taken a very, very long time to write, as far as like the separate sections. The focus for the most part, reinvestment in within the neighborhoods, also commercial reinvestment, land use, how we actually use land use within the city, entrepreneurship and business development, which is a very key thing that actually puts you to hit on as far as like retaining and actually bringing in businesses within the city. Dealing with small business development, MWBE, and trade up industries. What can we do to actually bring these in to retain them and actually, I would say, pitch them to actually show that the area and the surroundings is a good fit for everybody to be a part of. Workforce development training, and also access to employment. Arts and culture, this is a very huge thing which brings in a lot of revenue and also brings in transits as far as like transportation, well, sorry, transits as far as visitors, and also can help retain people to actually become resident within the city. Hospitality and tourism, and organizational structure and functions. And these are things that are very high on my list. I know they're quite high on a lot of people's lists. Healthy food choices for the entire city. As we know, the city technically is a food desert. So that's one thing that we do not have. We have primarily one grocery store for city limits within 50,000 people estimated. Servicing the unbanked communities, that is a very, very big need, because again, people don't have access. And transportation infrastructure is a very huge need to basically bring all this together. So if everybody does it, they can go through, we can go through this, and I can basically break everything down for you. So I will, for the most part, I will be like paraphrasing a lot, because I've probably read it like a million times, so I know pretty much about front and back. But as far as like what we can do, this, like I said before, this is an open-ended plan to basically see what we can do as a city and what we can do as a community to actually bring in more viable businesses, more viable residents, and also have this quote unquote destination place versus just a passive, which it usually is. One big focus again, small business and minority of business. We have Carl Singleton here in the crowd, who is going to be working along with me. That he's a really advocate about as far as like minority-owned business, bringing those businesses viable to the forefront within the community, because those are structured for basically everybody in the community and within the country, between minority as far as like color and expression of all within it. So those are real big top priorities. And as we know, like between a lot of the areas, between downtown, midtown, South Harrisburg, uptown, we have, and as this be canon, I'll be honest, like I'm from the city of Harrisburg, born here, raised here, graduated high school here, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you are from the area as well. So we know the disparity as far as like how the actual structure of the city is ran a lot of times. For the most part, we as a city, as a community, we don't work together a lot. And that comes to the forefront when it comes to a lot of things as far as actually getting things done and getting things moving. If we want to bring a lot of these businesses in, as far as like any kind of business or any kind of structure to actually bring more residents in, we have to work together as a team. Because again, we all work community. If we don't have the community together, it's not, we still have the same thing that have been going on for the past 37 years. It's like comparatively to say too, also one of the key things it's highlighted towards the end, because I actually worded everything out. As far as for the main page, as for all these things to work, we have a lot of programs, a lot of community programs, a lot of people in this area that want to actually make the city better. One key thing that we are missing within this area a lot of times is transportation. Transportation is a key thing for any economic development, both within any town, community, city, or whatever. Without that, you're going to be basically struggling or trying to figure out how to actually get these things done, especially trying to get people to certain places for employment. When employment rates go up, that's one thing that we have to do. And I know we're not sole controllers of the transportation. Again, this goes to the fact where we have to actually work together as with a lot of companies, as far as with the Capital Region Transit and so forth, to see what we can do as alternatives. A lot of these businesses have like ride shares and vans and so forth, but the thing is, those are technically second nature or second criteria for transportation. They should not be a first thought. Put a lot of companies at stress for trying to actually get people to work. If you want people to basically go to these programs for education, so forth, same thing with students, transportation has to work. Like on average, for, let's say, I'll put this in a roundabout as far as I go to the grocery store. Say if I live on Division Street, now you have one transfer post within the entire city, which counts for almost the entire area itself, which is downtown. You're looking at probably a couple of hour ride, just one way, maybe 2 or 3 hour ride, waiting to be school to clock up or around the outskirts to go. So that's the whole day. Now, just think about that as far as when it comes to basically trying to get employment. or looking for leisure or something like that, or trying to go to a program that you might try to get reallocated as a community with, it kind of puts everything at hold. So we have working together as the city, with, again, a couple of people I have here, various different people, to try to figure out ways what we can do with the programs that we have as far as like allocating funds or initiatives to actually bring businesses inside the city. One other portion of that person might be was the parking, again, something else that we have. You're looking at the problems of David or hourly rate that's probably 2 to 3 times more, about 33% more than Philadelphia. Again, what do you have to offer for somebody to pay 33% more to come to the city? Besides come down and pay a ticket or maybe go to a restaurant. So it's the programs that we do want to apply as far as like with busy workshop sessions, for small business, MBE, certification programs, and programs along with the housing department as far as like getting people ready for rentals or home buyer programs. Those are things that can happen. But again, like I said, as the things happen far in between, but if we want to make this work together as one, we have to bring all of this home together as one. Because again, when you look at, for instance, depending on where you live at, or if you look at somewhere in the area or something like that, you look at viable things that you want to have in your community. For the most part, you should have a walk between to an extent. You look at food resources. If you don't want to use your car for transportation, look at transportation sources. Look at the school district. You look at a lot of these things. So one thing that I've always known for being around living in this area. So there are 3 things that always like hit home as far as like how you describe the area of central Pennsylvania or Harrisburg or whatever. Cost of living is low. It's a good place to raise a family and talk about the immediate outskirts of the city. And 2 hours away from every metropolitan city. Again, how do you reverse that to make it come forward back to us versus people just using this place as a destination, or not as a transportation port to go somewhere else versus making it a destination? That's where we as a community, we as a city, have to come forward to actually make that happen. Like I said, I have this booklet here. I would love for you guys to actually I would like you to write notes and actually send me your thoughts and what we could do together as a team to make this happen. Like I said, there are a lot of things. But yeah, there are a lot of key points here. And like I said, this is all this is open to actually add to what we already for this plan. The whole portion of this plan is basically making an ecosystem friendly as far as like employment, bringing in business, and also the aspects of transportation and food sources, and something that is all here. And I know everybody here on this chair was pointed to this arrangement for because you are voices in the public community. So it's again, what can you do as far as like the resources to bring in home to actually make this for so this is part of the reason why we're having this conversation today. So if you have any questions, take it away.
I was just curious if you've had a chance to talk to the mayor about how we could get some of these goals reflected in the American Rescue Plan monies, because that is a big bucket and we've got one shot. And I do think, as you mentioned, there are lots of different layers of this, and one of the important things will be establishing priorities so that, it's been 4 years since we first brought it up. You all have done a good job quickly, but how do we make sure it's not another 3 years before we actually have a roadmap and people helping the city knowing what they're supposed to be doing?
So the question, that would, for as far as like her plan, and I know a lot of stuff was allocated as far as funds, everything's still going through public meetings to get their answers and so forth. So after all those things were said and done, everybody said all of the criteria of what they had, I think that's when they're actually going to make decisions as far as final decisions of what's going to be.
Well, and I might add, the mayor has seriously looked at many of the economic development drivers. One of her major centerpieces that she recommended the council was affordable housing, that Ms. Hill spent countless hours helping to develop a strategy and a plan. So I do think she definitely has taken into account her concerns on economic development, namely by having more affordable housing and helping to reduce the shortage of housing and the homeless population. I know that's some of her primary goals. I can't speak for her, but I know those are some of the recommendations. There's also recommendations for recreation, which of course is a key component of economic development in the sense that, you know, families have opportunity for recreation. It keeps the household and the family, you know, happier because they have an outlet in which to, you know, go to play basketball, go swimming, go, you know, the parks and so forth and so on. So I do think that she definitely has taken that seriously into account, particularly on the affordable housing piece
Affordable housing and health.
and the elderly.
Jason, hi. If I can make one suggestion as you continue to develop the draft, it would be to incorporate what the resources are needed to implement some of the items on here. For example, if you need budgetary dollars allocated to implement a program, staffing is needed, if facilities, land is required to be set aside. I think it's an important part of plan. So that's if I have one piece of advice as you continue to flesh it out, is that. And I'll take you up on your kind invitation. I'll shoot you an email with the advice, take it or leave it, and hopefully you can gather a lot of advice and pick out the best of it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Jason, I was very excited when we saw an economic development plan to start with, because that's something we have been pushing, harping, choose the verb that works for you or the explanation that works for you the whole time we've been here. But frankly, I was a bit underwhelmed when I looked at it, and you've addressed part of that in your opening by saying you will go back and put in statistics. I want to see some very concrete goals. In budget year X, we would like to bring in 10 new businesses in the following areas. Or that sort of thing, where when we go back and look at it, we've got some things to measure against. Because everything that you're talking about, yes, is important, but we can't solve all of these problems at once.
No.
I work with a lot of employment matters, so I'm very aware that we need transportation to get people to locations who might not have the availability to have a car. That's one group of citizens that we're dealing with. We're dealing with another group of citizens who have the cars, but have no place to park the cars once they get into the city. And that's only going to be worse with the new courthouse and the archives and the things that are around that. So we've got to look at ways to solve this sort of thing. We're calling Harrisburg a food desert. And it took me a very long time as a transfer to the city to realize that anything I bought at Broad Street Market was tons fresher than anything I could get at a grocery store. So in a way, we're a food desert if you measure it by grocery stores. But in another way, we've got wonderful resources. So somehow we have to figure out how to make that clear to people. Because there are a lot of people in what's been dubbed as the downtown or the midtown area that can walk to the market without too much trouble. So I'd like to see more specifics about what we want to do to attract things. I know the mayor is working on the parks and the recreation, all of which is good. I know for me, having grown up at the seashore, having a body of water that I can walk along in a park is a really big deal. Because you can see it from multiple locations in the city, and you can be there pretty quickly if you want to walk to it or even take some sort of transportation to it. But I think it's, and maybe by design, because you're only that far along, I would like to see lots more specifics, and I would like to pick and choose areas that we are working on within the next couple of years, and then project it out so that we can kind of say that, yes, we at least addressed this area, and in the next spurt, if you will, we want to address this area. I mean, some of the affordable housing things like we're talking about down at the Rock, the PennDOT location, are really, really intriguing, and hopefully that can go forward and be used other places. But I'd like to see specifics that we could come back and say, yes, we accomplished A, B, we're working on C, and yeah, D is on the planning list for calendar year X. I mean, we've got resources this year, which we should never expect to have again because of the one-time commitments in the American Rescue Plan. And shame on us if we don't use it. Thank you.
I'll follow up a little bit, maybe in a little bit different direction on some of Kathy's comments. I'm also on the statistical side of the street. While there's goals that are laudable and there's a lot in here that I think makes a lot of sense. I think it's also important to know where we started from and where we are. It's really easy to say, oh, well, we're missing this. We would like to have that. But what is our true trend line? So for example, if we're talking about office space, what is the need for office space? What is the need for Class A office space versus, conversions? What's our trend in residential housing? Sitting there casually, well, actually a little more actively, right, Ralph, watching, trying to sell a Class B office space, there's no market for that, but convert it back to residential, great idea. And, is that the trend, is that a trend line that's continuing? And how does that mirror what we're seeing in other cities that we might view as being successful? Which are the ones that are worth pursuing more? Which are the ones that say, well, this is a short-term trend, but here's where we need to go, either to sustain it if it's a good thing, or to move it in a different direction if there's other needs that we have.
And Doug, if I may, and we need the retail to support the residential development because the retail downtown is not in great shape at this point.
Yeah, it's not. You have, because you got to think, trying to think how many times has downtown been revamped to do something else. So again, you went from retail, which was a long time ago, to where Harrisburg first was more workers. It used to be filled retail. Then you have it went from nightclubs, and then it goes to restaurant world. It's again, it has to be a combination of all areas. It's not just one thing at a time.
And my law firm is sitting in the old Bowman space, part of that. So, where's the retail that's going to support all these people that are coming downtown? And hopefully will continue coming.
And it's also micro trends and macro trends. We're dealing with, I hope, is a micro trend in recovery from COVID, and the effect that it had on city revenues, certainly from parking, but more specifically quality of life, things like accessibility to the restaurants, their continuing viability downtown, short, long-term effects of the state's policy relative to telework, how that plays out with some of the law firms as well. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah,
It's a lot for a relatively small staff.
Yeah.
It's a lot. I know for like me personally, like I know there isn't like in due to COVID and everything else. You can see like how the past interiors of like past designs have worked, that there's not really a focus on resident base. Everything's focused based on transit. So again, how you reverse that to actually go to this resident base versus just transit. So just to the point too, as far as like for fresh food, yes, market is fresh, but it's only predictable. So yeah, it's like we need more viable things like that in the area. But in parking, again, another issue. So this is like, yeah, you have this, it's a lot of variances basically trying to get to what you want to path that actually make all those happen.
One other thing that, and forgive me, is a short study period for this is addressing how the educational situation fits
Yeah,
in.
that's a whole, that's a whole.
I know that, but, I'm looking at my neighborhood and the stereotype that we deal with is it's, people just out of school and getting their first job, and then my generation. And the in between, okay, as soon as we have kids, we're running to the suburbs. And that's our schools have capacity opportunity, but
That's a whole separate thing. I've actually had conversations with that. I've had conversations with parents, I've had conversations with. Again, it's about basically making everything one full circle for everything to work. Yes, we had a loss probably about 10, more than 10 years ago now. We look at the loss of William Penn, that was a full tech that was about like 12 students, and then have it, and everything's bust down to DC Tech, which only gets around like 100 kids per count. So it's not a lot of opportunity for somebody who's not really looking to go to college, but to trade. I know the school district itself, I've worked with them on basically resource fair. We're doing some more things as far as giving resources for internships and stuff for children within the area. Again, that's something behind the piece that's right.
The one thing I would encourage us as well, if we're not already doing this, really courting those big businesses that are here in town. We already had the biggest one leave. And if we look at some of the WebFX, those sorts of firms, we want to get more and make it easier for them to come into the city. And that goes back to your parking is the big elephant in the room. And I know you sit on a couple of committees of that. But I would think if anyone can come up with a solution for that, it could be a lifesaver, because there are companies every day going, we're gonna leave because we're paying more here than we are in Philly for a
Yeah,
monthly.
and it goes
parking
to
spot.
the point as far as like transportation, you're right, it's like this portion that people who don't have vehicles, but you also have a portion who don't want to drive, or in the parking situation. If there was a low value transportation source in the area, a lot of people would use it, just like in any large cities, when Philadelphia, basically, the entire state of Maryland, except for like 30% of it, they use it on mass transit. So you just get around. Makes it a lot easier and actually connect all municipalities, counties, townships. It's something that needs to work on. And obviously you're saying businesses as well. It is probably another thing I talk about a lot about. Like, say if I was a Fortune 500 company to come in and I'm looking for a place to go in Harrisburg, and I think this has happened like relatively recently with there was plans for the state hospital. Again, they need to put that somewhere else, but you gotta look at the area and what do you bring to me as far as offering as an area besides also as well. Good place to raise a family 2 hours away from that metropolitan city. There are amazing things, and there are a lot of events and a lot of culture. The thing is, there's few and far between all this stuff is gated. How do you do all this stuff into this year round to actually like that's an important thing. All this, everything is full circle. Everything's full circle.
I'm just gonna ask Elaine, do you have any questions? Okay, shaking that. Jeffrey, you had.
Yeah.
something.
Jason, thank you so much for coming. There was two things I wanted to point out. First, I wanted to thank you and the mayor for specifically targeting the various neighborhoods of the city, because I think something that this group has always recognized is that Harrisburg is much more than just downtown. And the economic success of the city is to have economic success throughout the neighborhoods. It's important to have that kind of success, to have vitality in the community. And therefore having, if you're developing targets, have what I would call micro targets or geographic targets for different parts of the community would serve you well. Because I think there are things obviously that you could do in a macro sense for the whole city, but there are things that can be done in neighborhoods which are specific to the attributes of that neighborhood, community resources, businesses which would be scale appropriate for certain neighborhoods. Obviously, it goes back to your discussion about being a food desert. We do have a wonderful market, but we have neighborhoods where they don't have anything. And so we have to look on more macro sense on it. What does each neighborhood need? How do they interconnect? And how do we address the people that live in those neighborhoods?
Local communities is a key component to, again, any large city, you have resources and services within the local community, which you can grow out your door, you can probably get 5 services and certain resources that you can here as a local area. So again, you have to drive every single word from this public.
And of course, historically, Jason, that was not the case. If you go back generations, every neighborhood had markets, every neighborhood had businesses in it that were thriving, that supported those neighborhoods. So there was a time when Harrisburg was a different type of community. And those kind of things are important to everybody's quality of life. You don't want just certain, one large business, you want distributed business and distributed economic success. The other thing I wanted to compliment you about of the draft plan is your recognition that certain people don't have access to banking or financial literacy. It's something that we don't always recognize in our society. It's difficult for certain communities to find access to those kind of services. And it's very important in ways to improve your financial status that you have the access to those things on a neighborhood basis. So I'm very glad that as part of the overall economic development strategy that you targeted financial literacy and banking is one of the things that needs to move out into our community, into the different parts of our community.
Yeah, so most of them have, I think they're actually like in the neighborhood where it's like a vast amount of people who have two, which is PNC on Dairy Street, we have Baldwin on Clinton Street. So outside, and you can count the M&T on Paxton Street, but that's on the couple of.
And it's expensive. I mean, these banks, if you're a working class person, it's difficult
Yeah.
to establish a banking relationship with those kind of providers. We don't have those kind of credit unions or those community banks or people who, I mean, those are wonderful institutions and they serve a purpose, but a variety of different types of institutions for all different types of customer. Once again, that's how you get vitality, like different types of housing, different types of markets, different types of banks. You want distribution because it helps everyone. So I'm glad that you've identified those things as you flesh out this report. So thank you, Madam Chair, for listening.
And I think you've identified a good number of a cohort to bring together that are going to be your partners in all of this. And I would encourage you to pull them in quickly, because certainly Creedic would be on the front line of dealing with the banking and trying to mentor and pull all of those people in. And I appreciate your invitation to all of us to send you any comments, and you can tell we don't mind speaking up. So I'm sure you'll get a barrage of suggestions, and obviously use what you want, but also feel free to contact us for follow-up, because we are here for the good of the city. And this is near and dear to our heart.
Thank you, Jason.
So thank you very much. Anything else?
What are the next steps?
Let's see. Next steps, like I said, there are like statistics stats. And like I said, this is just basically going to be a home point to actually have spin-offs as far as again, working with small businesses, working with unbanked them into the banks. Food resources that we need. This is, like I said, this was just the way I did this was to basically make it open to actually do more studies, not more studies, but actually break more plans along with this, so everything coincide with each other. So that's one of the reasons why I think this way, because I could be, for the most part, you're going to end up as a partner with somebody who's going to have basically a whole different outcome plan how you follow something. So again, it's about partnership and working. So that's basically the next step is basically going forward. I have a couple already established people that I'm already using for a lot of these things. So that's just going forward actually. It's missing initiating and trying to figure out what the actual purpose of what it is around so within the area. So the next step is basically doing that with a couple people that have key.
Following up on Ralph's, I think we've mastered the circles on Second Street. And so I think it would be roundabouts, right? It's not circles, right, sorry. But I think it would be good to look at this as sort of a big circle. And you need to identify all those people that are merging in. But then relative to the dates, let's get some dates as to when the circle is actually, when the roundabout is drawn. And when each of these pieces is going to fill in, because I think that will help you. I think it will help the city. I think it will help speaking to any potential investors that are coming in to say, aha, city has a plan. Here's the timeline. This, everyone can be broad and grand, but we've got to put it on paper. So now, thank you again. Appreciate it. You're free to go if you like, and we will be in touch. The next item on the agenda that we're discussing are the updated financials submitted by the city on April 20th. I believe Marita is going to give us an update. And as we remember, these are in lieu of an official wholesale update of the plan that we approved in September 2022. Because that was due, a wholesale plan would have been due April 30th. We said to the city, if you update certain charts, we can take that as an amendment for this year. Therefore, in the history books, there will never be a 2023 full revision of the 5-year plan. I know people will be disappointed, they'll be looking for it, but it's not going to be there. So Marita, I think it's important to talk a little bit about what you presented to us. It's an official submission, and therefore we will vote on whether to accept it or reject it. And if we reject it, that doesn't mean it's not permanent. It means that it is, we found some issues. Let's go back, let's revisit, fix those, and come back. And that normally takes, or a 30-day period is granted for those sorts of back and forth, because that is contemplated in Act 24. So Marita, before we discuss, I'd like to turn the floor to you.
Thank you, Madam President. We have distributed the ICA 5-year plan summary from 2022 to 2026 to the members of the board. And our business administrator has approved these. Fundamentally, we in 2022 are very sound with our beginning cash balance of 27 million. However, in 2023, wisely, the administration and the council has decided to pay down the AMBAC loan, not only pay down, but pay it off, remove it and get it off the books. That's an enormous milestone. We all know that happened March 15th. But with that happening March 15th, it also reevaluated where we stand from a fund balance standpoint. And the ending cash balance for this year will drop from 23 million to 12 million because of the 8.3 million that we paid in the final payment for AMBAC. So good and bad news. Good news, we have it paid off. Not bad news, but not the perfect news. Our fund balance has, and we anticipate will close close to 13 million at the end of this fiscal year. That being said, then going out to 2026, we're sort of holding our line steady, thank goodness. We anticipate that we'll still be in about the same position, slightly lower, 11.7 or so in 2026. At the ending cash balance at the end of 2026 is forecast to be 11.5 million. So we still believe that there was great guidance in paying down that AMBAC loan because, or AMBAC forbearance, because otherwise the taxpayers would be laden with high interest on that outstanding bond. And the goal was to eliminate it. And that was a great closure to a long standing battle on the bond being refinanced and a forbearance being formed, and now it's paid off. So that's kind of where we look in the 5-year period through the end of 2026. It's not perfect, but it's 12 million is still a very sound amount of fund balance to have, and that's with having all our bills paid off. And keep in mind, our biggest challenge right now is our inability to borrow. So that means that we have built into these estimates paying for all capital with cash. And so that number, if we are able to exit 47 and we are able to have a borrowing in 2024 or 25, that number of 12 million will change significantly because we'll be able to borrow and be able to manage our fixed assets in a more productive way. So, so that kind of gives you the full picture of where we stand, paying as we go for all capital, including that includes trucks, buildings, facilities, HVAC, no matter what, we have to pay cash for it each year through 2026. So it's a bit of a challenge, but we believe we're up to that challenge. Now, if you look at just the revenue forecast, you can see that we forecast about $73 million in revenue in 2026, with expenditures to be about 71 million. So we do have a operating surplus, and but as you can see, we're going to have to spend almost 3 million in 2026 for capital, and again that puts a dent in our cash balance. So if we can get past 47, that's not a decision or a wish or a hope, it's just the fact that we're in this holding pattern, as everyone knows on this board, until we're able to effectively borrow and be able to more appropriately manage our cash assets. And then we did provide for you a kind of the best summary we can by line item: personnel, services, supplies, debt, capital, and so forth, by line item, by department for the general fund, so that you can see where we will stand in terms of the general fund expenditures through 21 through 26. We forecasted out 24, 25, and 26. So we have provided that to you as well. And then lastly, I'm going to hand out a new sheet. I think maybe that's there a second. Here, for the Neighborhood Services Fund. Do you have, we don't have a copy of this? No, just I'll send 3 to my right and 3 to my left. And then I have one here.
I have it.
There you go. So Neighborhood Services Fund, again, we're attempting to do a forecast from 22 actuals to 23, a 26 forecast. And again, we're struggling with the fact that we have to purchase all of our capital as pay as you go, even with our sanitation activity and our Parks and Rec activity in the Neighborhood Services Fund, leaving us kind of a slim margin there in the end of 2026, about $500,000, less than $500,000 for a fund balance. So what we're hoping is that there'll be an opportunity for borrowing, that there'll be an opportunity to look at some other options. The administration is not in a place today to be able to say what she has on her mind in terms of how we can maybe offset some of the concerns we have in the Neighborhood Services Fund. I know a few of them, but like I said, I'm not at liberty to discuss them. I can discuss what you field questions and you want me to answer questions. I'll answer what I can. But we do have our challenges in the Neighborhood Services Fund. This year alone, we had to use a significant amount of money that caused a change in the fund balance, and therefore our fund balance went down to 5.2 from almost 7 million this year alone in 2023. The next year we're at 5 million, closing at nearly 4, and so forth and so on. So as long as we have to continue to pay as you go to buy our trash trucks and to buy our maintenance equipment for Parks and Rec, it's going to be a struggle. So our hope is that we're able to get some kind of answer, some kind of remedy to the borrowing issue. But as of now, we don't have that. So that's kind of what I have to report in terms of our 5-year plan. And the kind of a good news, if you wouldn't mind me saying, is that there is not going to be a formal 23 other than what we presented. But we do have the chance to really give, and this is one of the reasons why we had asked and the mayor has granted, and you have agreed to allowing us to do this full year report, the 5-year report for 2024 by August 31st. Because the value of that is you don't have 1 quarter of information, which we just received, what, 2 weeks ago, not even a week ago. through the controller. You'll have a full half of the year fully executed that can tell us what our activities are for revenues and expenditures. So we think this data is going to be much more robust, more reliable, and more approachable and discussable, because you'll have a lot of issues you want to discuss, related to that. So I am hopeful that when we have chance to have better information, more substantial information, we'll also have the mid-year report to City Council before your report is due to you. So we're hoping that robust report for 2024, the 5-year history, the 5-year report the city will present to the ICA will be much more robust, much more available in terms of data and information, and we can give you some remedies that the administration is proposing that we're not at liberty today to discuss at great length. So that's my report.
Thank you, Marita.
I still have the trash report, which we can do after this. I don't want to murky the waters with that, just so you know.
Marita, to the extent you can comment on it, clearly there's a big change between the handout today and the information that's dated the 20th.
Yeah, the main change is that there should have been a more thorough examination of the capital, because this year, oddly enough, we had to purchase 3 trash trucks. We haven't purchased that many trash trucks since 2017. So with that robust need for those trash trucks, we know we're not going to need that for the out years. Now, obviously, some of the individuals who are doing this are new to our staff and didn't do the deep dive as we should have, and my apologies to everyone for that. But that's kind of the difference, is that we know that our capital pay as you go for those out years will not be as substantial as it is for this year. And therefore we were able to provide a more accurate and complete information to you on the neighborhood services, because no, we didn't change the revenue numbers, because those revenue numbers are still difficult for us to get a handle on. COVID really clobbered us with the trash collections, and our arrears are improved, as Brian mentioned 2 months ago when I wasn't here, but they're not where we would like them. And we just this month, well, actually the month of February, we actually started implementing penalties again for people who do not pay their trash on time. So there's a lot of factors related to those revenues that are still a lot of unknowns. The other thing that Brian brought up, which I thought was important, was that we think that we will be able to, with our improvement in parking, which we've seen robust improvement in parking already in the first quarter, and we hope now that many of the state employees are back, not as many as we'd like, but many are. We're seeing this robust improvement. So Brian and I and Tim, the budget manager, really believe that we may be able to have sufficient money from that additional parking that we haven't had for 3 years, that we could perhaps transfer to neighborhood services to help shore that up a little bit until we're able to get the borrowing again lined up for appropriateness. So I don't know if that's a good answer or not, but that's the best answer I
Thanks
have
for
for
the
you.
explanation.
I know, and I've talked to Marita about this, one of the reasons we also really needed these updates is numbers for 23 came in so differently than were projected. And so.
And that payment of that AMVAC really skewed everything, I think, everything. It was great that we did it, but it was hard for us to anticipate, because until council said they were ready to do it, we couldn't anticipate it. So it wasn't budgeted. You see what I'm saying? So
Right.
that's really what skewed everything for us, even us, when we know we are the ones that process the budget reallocation. Some of our staff is still looking at the budget document and not at this recent transfer that happened the end of March. So it's one of those things we're in constant motion all the time. I know it sounds like excuses, and I wish we were, kind of better mind readers, but we're not. So, but I do think that, 2023 was an interesting year for sure. And still is yet to be unfolded. Did that help answer your question? I'm not sure. if it did or didn't.
A little. I think Kathy's question was right on point. When numbers change significantly, it does cause you to rethink what's going on, because that you sort of think they have a solid footing, and I understand you're maturing your staff and that takes some time. But we really want to make sure that these numbers are solid because that is our responsibility as an oversight board to be able to report
Absolutely.
to the legislature. And that will be what we talk about next, our report to the state.
And it did help that Charlie and his team released their report the same day we were releasing this to you. And we were able to catch some things that Charlie had added on his report, but you guys were reviewing the same day. So that kind of validated that robust payment to AMBEC was not recorded in the original numbers. And that's why it became skewed.
And colleagues, please speak up. I am concerned the way we've evolved with these reports, that I would actually, my gut would be to reject this submission and ask you to go back and format everything specifically, but more importantly, footnote, so that someone has the ability to look at the 5-year plan that we accepted, and they know how we got here, that we didn't pull numbers out of the hat. And explanations like you just said, a footnote that says on the neighborhood services fund, the expenditure numbers are significantly down because we pulled out capital because we're looking at different ways to fund it. That the revenues went up. I mean, the expenses went up significantly from what was first reported. But, you know, what were the
I'll be
major
happy to do
factors?
that.
I mean,
That's no problem.
but that is only me speaking, that I do not speak on behalf of my colleagues, but that would be my gut. Reactions?
A couple of things first. I agree with your comments. Seeing these numbers, revised numbers, first time right now, I think I'd like to digest that a little bit more.
Sure.
And then, given your capacity to fine tune this, there might be some capacity to fine tune the general fund numbers as well. I appreciate your confirmation on the capital number. That was my suspicion, was that was a pay-as-you-go number. Obviously, it would be a pointless exercise right now to guess what the difference would be if we were doing it based on, using debt and then debt service payments and so on, because we aren't going to be doing that before 2026. The other observation I have is that I'll be looking forward to the submission later this year, because in even controlling for the capital line, I'm looking at the declining margin year over year for both the general fund and for neighborhood services fund. And one would logically project that out, in another 3 years, that those numbers end up zero or even. It's unfair to ask anybody. It's difficult enough to do a 5-year projection, let alone let's guess what our service requirements are going to be and what the economy is going to be and all the rest of that after 5 years. So, it's pointless to speculate right now. But I will be interested when we have more concrete numbers for 2023 to see how these projections look for the near term.
The other thing I would love to see, I am hopeful that the parking numbers will stay as you're projecting, but I'd like to have some quantification of the degree of certainty that people have for that staying, because 1 footer may not be enough to measure that. And a lot of it we're basing on what's going to come in there.
I do think that Brian took into account the sluggishness of that quarter. So when he did the projection, he was as realistic as he could be based on what we historically have collected and how many people we know have returned to the state and how many days they're here. And we can tell what days they're here and when the projections are improved. So yes, we need more information to give you better numbers, but I know he was conservative in his estimate based on the facts that he had available to him at the moment.
Thank you. Yeah, for my part, I think there's two sort of larger issues, which are the general fund versus the neighborhood services fund. And then I think just within each one of the funds, there's probably some more ticky-tacky questions as to the details of some of the values that are in each one of the funds. First one I would say is, which is a really big one, is the problem with the deficit in the neighborhood services fund. And I think that one's, I don't know how else to say it other than it's kind of black and white. It's not balanced, and it runs a significant structural deficit, and it approaches zero by the end of 2026. And it's my gut is that it's an honest trend. I think it's probably enough to strike a little fear in one's heart. And so I think that in its own doesn't meet the requirement, doesn't meet the standards for approval under our governing statute. So I think that the trend in the neighborhood services fund is really serious, and I think we need to really get ahead of that. I don't know what that entails, right? Other than seeing it now seeing today's numbers, which are a little bit better than last week's chart. On and I want to come back to that, just ask you one or two specific questions on those items. And then on reviewing general fund, I would say I would offer this as a constructive criticism, although I think you're within your sort of parameters where I think it's probably acceptable. I wouldn't hesitate to approve it, but I just wanted to note as a constructive criticism that the revenues, I feel pretty confident with what you're doing there. I think there was the 5-year plan from last year looks like it was a little more conservative, which is good, and revenues came in a little better than we were thinking back in 2022, and that taking those actual revenues from 2022 and then 23 year to date, it looks like you're bumping them up a little bit to reflect the more recent year, and I think that's appropriate. And the difference would be revenue forecast last year, we were looking at general fund around 70.2 million for 2026, and here you're growing, same assumptions, it ends up around 73 million. So I think that's probably appropriate. On the expense side, that's where I think I offer constructive criticism, which is that it looks like sort of across the board, the expenses are increasing anywhere from $8 to $9 million per year consistently versus a year ago. I think it would be helpful to understand A, that you stand behind those as far as projections go, and that B, the city feels it's getting its money's worth for all that spending. It does still leave a balanced budget in the general fund, so I think it's acceptable, but I do think it's, by way of constructive criticism, I think it merits digging into it a little bit to make sure you're happy with spending a lot, with spending what you're forecasting would go under the current trends.
Right, and I mean, last year we were clobbered with diesel fuel alone at $7.50, $8 a gallon, where prior year we're paying $4.50, $5 a gallon. So and gas has come down, but not the way we had hoped. So we had to be concerned about our supplies and services, but more importantly, our wages are based on the 2 union contracts that are approved already. So one is approved at, we have a good deal of management, of course, but our AFSCME is increasing at 3% each year with bonuses, and our police are increasing at 3.5% each year with bonuses. And fire is currently not settled yet. We're still at an impasse, and we're expecting that fire is not going to get less than AFSCME, or it's possible they could, but we've already negotiated something more reasonable according to AFSCME and police. So the personnel cost is really one that's driving the factors that we really don't have a lot of control over, since those contracts are now approved and in place. I'm not saying that's bad, good, or otherwise. It's just a cost that Personnel is always your highest cost, and public safety is our very highest cost, not just for this city, but for every third-class city in Pennsylvania. The public safety costs are personnel are, and supplies, because you have to supply them with guns and ammunition, bulletproof vests, fire apparatus and so.
May I offer a comment on that? I know in the past, the historical expenses that we've seen, it's probably not fair to compare them to the projections because it involves a lot of budgeted but unfilled positions. So looking at actual numbers for the past is not, it's not automatically fair to compare them to forecast, which I think when you budget per position, you intend to fill it.
Right.
So anyway, I think as far as the constructive criticism goes, that's where I leave it at. But spending $8 to $9 million more a year in expenses, and necessarily, which is fine, again, that budget's balanced, but it doesn't necessarily take away from either the ability to do pay-as-you-go capital expenses or money that would be available for debt service or future borrowing for larger capital projects. So that's my take on general fund. But I said mentioned on the neighborhood services fund already, and I did have two questions for you on the handout. First one was regarding the 3 trucks that were purchased. Am I correct in recalling that the city used grant revenues?
Only for the recycling. I mean, the regular trash trucks, we cannot get grants.
Okay.
So we paid full price for the regular.
Three.
Trans- Yeah, and the recycling grant is not 100%. They don't pay 100%. So there's, still money we have to contribute. It's a match, So, but most of the price is in those two, the 2 trash trucks, and our trash trucks are, picking up for 4 communities. So it's, it's necessary that we purchase. I mean, we have a couple of trash trucks that are cannibalized because, we just can't use them anymore. So we use them to help buy parts for the other pieces. So that's why it was necessary to buy 2 new trucks. And then the recycling truck. And there's other equipment besides just trash trucks and recycling trucks. There's multiple pieces of equipment that they have. They have a ton of F-150s, 2 F-250s. They have small 10-ton trucks, 20-ton trucks, because there's also, because during the summer we go throughout the city and fill those 10 and 20-ton trucks with trash that's in either vacant lots or and some that we own through HRA, Harrisburg Redevelopment Authority, some that the city owns, and some that people just don't take care of. So to reduce the rat population and so forth, we pick up. So there's, those are just the trash trucks. That doesn't include those other trucks, but we did buy a number of the new trucks as well, which hopefully will improve our fleet and make it more efficient. So it was a new public works director who has an astute understanding of sanitation. You've seen Mr. West here talk about it, but he was able to really tell us, 2023 is our year to really kind of revamp what we need to make sure that facility, the sanitation trucks are running, sometimes 7 days a week and so forth.
Paul's question, how does the grant funds received, how is that reflected on this chart?
Yeah, that would be the intergovernmental revenue.
Is it not reflected here?
Well, some of it they may have recorded in the miscellaneous revenue as well. It depends on the type of grant and the structure of the grant. So.
Okay, and so that was my first question. The second question has to do with under the 2023 budget and comparing that to the forecast going out from there. It's the personnel expenditure.
Right.
Could you I point that out to you and ask for you to explain sort of the quality of those numbers? It shows the budget for personnel at $7,188,000. And then for 2024, the forecast goes down by 10%. And then that seems to be the basis upon which the future years, the 2024 number seems to be the basis upon which the future years are escalated. Could you talk a little bit about the quality of those numbers and what's going on in there?
Yeah, the personnel, again, we did have the union contract passed beginning of last year. So that was very robust, and we were able to hire a good number of management in 2023, and some of them they will need to retain into the future years, but some of them, once we get everything aligned and we get our contracts settled, we should be able to more appropriately manage that salary situation. And the other problem we have is we were aggressively able to get a significant number of people hired in 2023, but it's the same problem we have every year. We know sooner hire trash haulers and trash collectors that we lay them off. We don't lay them off, I'm sorry, that we lose them. So we have this constant, battle, as you talked about, trying to keep those positions filled, so there's a lot of dynamics that go into the personnel situation.
Again, I think that warrants a footnote. I think that's a good point. I mean, when you lose almost 700,000 in personnel from one year to the next, that
Sure,
is
would be
something.
happy to footnote
And so just
the outliers.
to try and keep us just back on track a little bit. I would like to maybe close this and ask for a motion that reflects the conversation, saying that indeed the neighborhood services fund does not meet the standards of the submission for approval, so we would reject it, asking you to go back, revisit, explain. And at the same time, I would like to ask the same for the others, for the other, or at least the overall fund, because that'll encompass the rest. In order to make sure there's a logical progression that someone could understand how we got from A to B. And then once we get the final submission for 24, there's a tie in there somewhere. Yes,
Sure.
I'll be happy to make a motion. Let me throw this out there and see how the fellow members feel about it. I think part of it is tempering what the response is, in order that we can hopefully button it up quickly so that the city can then move on and get to the better plan, which will be in August. So I think as far as general fund goes, my suggestion would be to offer, just as we always do when we approve under the approval scenario, offer constructive criticism and then ask for the final version, as we often do once approved, that it meets the standards, and for final version, please, add the following footnotes and references as needed. That would be my suggestion in order to minimize the amount of effort that's further spent revising numbers that do meet, in my opinion, standards. And as far as the rejection portion of the letter, it should really, the neighborhood services fund there needs to be some version of it in which it either is, I don't know, I won't say what the answer is to that. It's up to Marita and her ACE team to begin to push that in the right direction, but it's not there now.
I have a procedural question or a content question. If I understand the act, and I know Ralph, you're probably as knowledgeable as anybody about what the act says. The board is not supposed to accept the financial plan that shows a deficit. But is it specific like overall, or is it specific that the neighborhood services fund can't show a deficit for just that fund? Do we have have we established a rule one way or the other? I'm really asking. I know
It'll say that it's to the effect of a major fund,
okay, so the neighborhood.
and the city has two, as I believe, really
General
two
fund,
major,
neighborhood service. So,
plus like debt service, which gets money moved in and out.
right, so this table that Marita, this interim table that she handed us shows an operating deficit in each year of the fund. So unless they have a plan to cover that deficit, that's going to be a problem.
For example, improving collections.
For example.
Yeah.
Or lowering
With funding
expenses.
associated for.
Revenue or
collections.
expense on one side of the equation. In other words, you can't accept the table as honest as it might be. You
Honest
can't
is good, it's a good
accept-
starting.
Right, but the problem is it actually shows a negative number in operations for the neighborhood services, and that's a problem.
Right.
Okay, so that gives Maria something to chew on as she thinks about what to do with the neighborhood service.
Well, we know what we'd like to propose, but it's really proposals for the 2024 budget. And those are not, we're not at liberty to release them at this moment.
And the problem is, I think, Maria, and I don't want to speak for the board because I'm not a member. The law says that the tables are supposed to be balanced. And while you have plans on ways to balance it in the future, you're sort of at the point where you have to put some numbers to paper that show some way that the deficit is not going to exist in the future. So you have to find a way to balance your development of policy, which comes from the mayor,
Right,
as well as the numbers on this table, which are the outcome of those policy decisions and result currently in the neighborhood services fund showing deficits.
well, as long as I get permission to release the three proposals, fine, but I, at this point, I don't
You
have
have to
that.
work on that, but
Yeah.
that's sort of what your challenge is.
Right,
basically.
right, I mean, we really do think those proposals will make a significant change, but those cannot be enacted until,
Well, this
the
is just a
mayor-
forecast,
yeah,
so this is
right.
not enacting, so you.
yeah, but I have to speak to
Yes, of course
Mr.
you-
Grover about what we can release and what we
I
cannot.
didn't need to put you on the spot, I
Yeah.
just wanted to be clear in the communication that, that's the challenge of trying to come back with something for neighborhood services that meets the necessity of the act, but also, does not disclose or put you out on a limb or a promise that you can't keep or something to that effect. It's difficult, but the whole point of the exercise, if you think about it, is to get the city to think 5 years out, and that's a difficult thing to do. Especially when you're developing future policies for revenues and expenditures, but that's why it's supposed to be different. And I obviously have confidence in the staff and leadership of the city to come up with a revised proposal.
If it's for helpful for one man's opinion, Marita, I think your personal integrity, the personal integrity of the mayor, both of you, that is well known. I think if you're exercising discretion in the amount of detail you provide in your forecasts, to justify them, and I think you would find, speaking for myself, I think you would find a receptive audience.
Madam Chairman, I'm comfortable seconding the motion made by member Jartan.
Sort of bifurcating the general fund and the neighborhood services fund, two different.
And rejecting the neighborhood services fund for the reasons we've already just discussed.
with the notes then what we would like to see in the other charts. So that's a second, any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Marita, and as always, you know that Jeffrey stands ready to help you. As do I and other members of the board.
May I ask a couple questions if you don't mind? I know I'm ex officio, so I can be limited on what I ask, but since this is due to the General Assembly on Monday, what is expected of us?
I
For
think that's a
Monday.
good question. We sort of discussed this before.
Right.
I think we would like to be able to place what we were calling Appendix A table into the report.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's most important, that it appear in the annual report. We were, of course, going to include the 2022 full 5-year plan, even though it's out of date. This is a retrospective annual report, so it makes sense to say this was the former fully approved plan. And that our feelings, at least the chair, my feelings is that the Appendix A table is sufficient at this point to relate to the General Assembly, as well as your debt service information, by the way. We haven't mentioned that, but you also provided us very up-to-date debt service information. But those two things, and then the rest of the detail, like the detail on the neighborhood services fund and the detail on the expenditures table that's not in that Appendix A, we weren't going to include that in the final annual report, because we'll be having another 5-year plan update in August, which will make the next annual.
And again, we all know this is supposed to be a report on FY 2022. So we actually are giving them a little bit extra. by
Which
giving
we
them-
usually do.
Right,
We just say, this is about last year, but here's some current stuff to inform your looking at last year. So we've been doing that since our first annual report, which comes in April, so we've been always saying, here's the last calendar year, and here's what we've learned since the last calendar year ended. which is a strange way to write a report, but that's the way we've been dealing with it, so.
And you had two questions, I think, right?
Yeah, and the second question is, when would you like the neighborhood services fund update and the other two general fund spreadsheets updated and to you?
Because we were treating this as an official projection, you have 30 days to get that back. Ideally, it would be great if you could get it back to us before the board meeting next month, and I can't remember if that's exactly 30 days, sometimes it's 28 days.
You know what they?
It's the next board meeting is on the 24th of May, so it's a little shorter than 30 days.
Yeah, if you could.
Normally, the law would say you have 30 days, but if we wanted to make sure that this board had the ability to react to it on the 24th of May, we needed a little bit before the 24th of May. So it's 4 weeks, but it's not quite 30 days.
I mean, fundamentally, we just need to clarify our footnotes and our details as to
And you
why
need to
we came
make
up.
some- And you need to make some decision about the neighborhood services fund
Yeah.
chart, which might be more complicated.
Right, and I mean, I think the proposed decisions are available, but it's just whether I can release them or not. It's something I'd have to discuss.
And we'd be more than happy to talk, I would be happy to talk to you offline because I'm not a voting member of this group. So we could talk, you and I, staff to staff, and see if we can write words that would be acceptable to the administration, but would provide enough insight as to how we got to it. And we can work on that together. I'd be happy to.
Crack the code on balancing that fund. I think you're gonna be carried off on our shoulders a little.
Yeah, well, I don't think that code's gonna be easily cracked. It's an
Let's
issue.
be optimistic.
Okay, we're gonna move on to the agenda, and I am going to speak rapid fire because I know we're well behind where we all expected to be at this time. So the next on the agenda is a brief discussion on the section 203 report, which we've referenced several times, which is due to the legislative leadership and the governor by April 30th. A huge thank you to Ralph and Doug, who worked with Jeffrey to pull the main part of the body into final shape. So I think there are a couple updates on numbers, figures, filling in the blanks, and table of contents.
Yep.
But Jeffrey can handle that. And I'm working on a draft of the cover note, which I would like to call on Kathy and Elaine. I will share my cover letter with you all, if you could help give some feedback. Primarily because in the cover note, I always state that this report represents the consensus of the 5 of us. So I have the report which you have edited, on which to base that. Just want to make sure that you two have a chance to take a look at it as well, to make sure I haven't stepped outside of those bounds. And so all of that will take place probably Friday, and I think I need a motion. Exactly, to execute the distribution of this document. Can I have a motion? I guess I can make those myself too, right?
I'll make a motion to authorize the chair to finalize and execute the report and submit it.
Second,
Second.
all those in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We're going to turn over the floor to Mike Cassidy, because we do have two mics, remember? Mike Cassidy, who's going to talk about our MOU with DCED.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the board members will recall that in 2018, when the authority was formed under Act 124, soon after the authority entered into a memorandum of understanding with DCED for funding operations for the authority. That was a 5-year MOU intended to cover at the time what was to have been the initial 5-year term of the ICA. That funding memorandum provided for $100,000 of annual funding for the ICA. Currently in the final year of the 5-year term of that MOU, and of course, because the city is still in Act 47 status, the 5-year term of the authority has not begun to run. So, in preparation for an extended a term for the ICA for another 5-year term, I prepared a second amendment to the MOU, which I submitted through Michael Wood in the Office of the Budget. It's been reviewed by DCED and it's been approved as to its form by General Counsel for DCED. And so I submit the draft or proposed second amendment to the memorandum of understanding between the ICA and DCED to you for approval. Happy to answer any questions with respect to that.
And it was shared with you as part of the documents in preparation for today's meeting. Anybody have any questions for Mike, concerns? If not, could I ask for actually, I can, right?
Yeah.
I want to make I would like to make a motion to adopt the amended MOU with DCED for ratification or execution.
Second,
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries.
I think, I know we're trying to go fast, but I really think that we need to thank both Mikes.
Oh, both Mike saying.
Well, yes, but this was an important thing that we needed to get done, the business of the authority. And you were both very helpful, so thank you both very much for accomplishing this. And of course, our friends at DCED, thank you both very much. Always for our relationship with the state is important to us.
Jeffrey, over to you.
Okay, in no particular order of importance, we do have a bills paid report, which was distributed to you. Let me see if I can find my copy of it. For today, there are our typical items on it. You will notice there was one unusual item, which will be my second order of business, which is the public officials liability insurance. But other than that, we will end this month's period with a current balance in our account of $149,530.78. And we have year-to-date interest paid by First National Bank of $8.52. And if there's no questions, we can proceed to the second order of business, which is the public officials liability insurance. Thank you to Mr. Hill for assisting as usual. We did get our policy renewed at no increase to the annual rate, which we like. The provider is Gunn & Mowry. The underwriter is Greenwich Insurance. And the cost for the annual policy to protect the public officials who serve the ICA is $5,712, which I said is the same as last year's premium for the same policy. So with that, I would ask for authorization to renew our public officials liability insurance. Madam Chair.
Any questions before we make a motion? I'll have someone else make it. Spread it.
second,
All those in favor say aye. Aye, opposed. Motion carries.
Thank you.
So Neil, you've been here a while. I'm sorry. I'm fine. The city solicitor, Neil Grover, is with us this afternoon and has indicated that he has an update on the city of Harrisburg incinerator litigation, specifically as it relates to the Act 47 coordinator's role in that case. I hope that introduction is correct.
It's generally correct, letting know that the city of Harrisburg is actually the Commonwealth's case. The
Okay.
city that is carrying this out, the city of Harrisburg. We have been involved in the largest subpoena I've ever seen by not living. We have, I think, 38 cases of records that are scanned and sent. We produce 28 separate cases of records that have been examined, 155 backup tapes. We have identified records in 10 separate facilities that have been searched. We have a team doing that. We have 4 buildings left to go. And they're not necessarily all responsive, but they're where responsive records may be. They have extended discovery until October, I believe is the deadline. They have not started taking testimony yet, which is out of our control. We have no say in them. So it is moving forward. And We've had lawyers visit the city and our outside counsel's office in the city from both sides to look at records, to look at audio tapes, to watch both city council meetings. That's every day. But that stuff has been going on sort of very consistently for a while. The trial date since discovery is October. It looks like it's in 2024. But really the trial judge will have to say over that. He has, as I understand it, an indication he would like us to move along. Which is good. The city would like it to move along as well. We've been very diligent in trying to not become the reason they delay. In moving forward. That's how the city has approached this. But it has actually caused us to go through almost every office and record in an unorganized system that we have. So that is, it's progressing. I'm not going to do a legal analysis of either that case or the exit from Act 47 related to that case. That's not in a public meeting. We can have that discussion offline somewhere. But I have very clear opinions of the process. We think there is an alternate process. It just a lot of people have to agree on that alternate process. And ultimately, a judge has to agree on that alternate process.
Well, thank you. And I think if nothing else, today's meeting, I think really points at the fact that we need to get the city out of Act 47 so it can borrow money. And
we are painfully aware.
right. And so I encourage us to put all energies toward that and know that we stand ready to do whatever we can. I know Andra probably would like to get it off of her work out of her portfolio as well. So we stand ready. Keep us informed. We want to make sure we're using every creative way to get the city some relief. And I know you would as well, but
I very much would, yes.
yeah.
I would very much like to be done with Act 47 and this litigation. I had dark hair when it started. So. But for that issue, that's the update.
But I may call you. Any questions for you? Oh, yeah.
I do have one question on another subject, which maybe Neil can just quickly enlighten us. I understand that you've been up staffing in your department and that.
Slowly but surely.
And that you feel that you're in a better place to respond to some of the demands of the office that's been struggling for a while.
So in 2022, the city of Harrisburg had 512 formulations of positions, all of which we responded to. It's not counting informal, not counting subpoenas, not counting record requests, not counting incinerator items. When we've had a staff of now, I've had 2 more attorneys who used to work for me and came back. They're back in the city. We have 2 staff members and we have made offers to 2 more staff members for positions that hopefully will start in May if they get it in the process. I will know, like many places in the city, it's a different employment world now. There's people who've accepted offers in different offices and then just didn't show up at the very end. They just said, no, thank you. I got a job. So we're hopeful, but I'd like to see a body in the chair. We'll know they're really there. So good. Thank you.
Neil, is that the end of the upstaffing, if you will, for the year?
No, I have 5 vacancies right now, 2 of which we have offers for, 3 more vacancies to fill. And there then maybe in a mid-year, another position added based on a resolution of a grievance. Perform certain things that are not being staffed right now by anyone.
And will you have sufficient funding in the budget to do that?
For the additional position, we will need a reallocation. If they're going to do that as a settlement, that is a settlement related to this actually. That's not written in stone yet. No one has signed it. But all the other positions are funded.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Good.
Thank you, Neil. I noticed to my left that Ralph is looking at very, very tiny print. I forgot about turning it over to you is that for the receivables or what is?
Yes,
Yes, and I forgot you wanted to.
Maybe we should.
Yeah.
yeah, it's just updated information for
Okay.
you. It's, Actually, we provided something very similar to you earlier this month. So at least you and Jeffrey have reviewed it.
Yeah,
Okay, yes.
But I don't know if you sent it out to them or not. To you guys, okay, because it doesn't provide it to them earlier.
so we'll just accept that and everyone can take a look at it. If you have any questions, shoot them Marita's way.
Because this was presented in the meeting, just so you understand, this means this will be appendix to the minutes for this meeting, which means it becomes a public document, which is good. That way these things are trackable,
Right.
so it's good that we have it. Okay.
And the good news, Neil will tell you, is that he has recently hired someone for Neighborhood Services Fund, which was a budgeted position, who will be doing collections. She's actually the same person who did them before, so she doesn't have to learn the job.
Okay.
So we're really hoping we could have some robust improvements to that.
And one of the conditions that this started in May is the person to assist. Administrative staff. So hopefully that will start going.
Jeffrey, I'll turn it over to you.
Sorry to.
No, that's not true. I just know that and I forgot.
Yes, that's excellent. Okay, so first of all, I see we lost manager, but Beverly, do you
I
have
think she
anything?
may have just excused herself.
Oh, okay.
As her post.
On behalf of VCD, would you like to put anything on the record?
No, I would not.
It is always a pleasure to see you at our meetings. Mr. Epstein, do you have anything you'd like to bring to our attention?
Yeah, well, I mean, some of the themes that played out today we brought to your attention for a very long time, so it's disappointing to see that occur, and I'm not really sure what more we can do as the public. The three issues we've consistently raised, Neighborhood Services Fund. Thought the last presentation was disappointing, there was no plan. We sat here and we didn't hear a plan. Still concerned about OPEB. And we're still concerned about healthcare costs, and we began the fact finding last August. I just received a response to the last right to know request we did. I point out there's areas where we could save money that I don't think you're looking at, especially when it comes to carve out of the healthcare. And the issue about footnotes, Audrey, I'd like to say I raised that a long time ago and asked the right to know request for substantiation of the budget claims that were made, and they were denied. And I'm a historian, and so maybe I'm overly anal, but I think when you say something, you need to document it in order for it to have veracity. And that still concerns me. One of the things that we never looked at, what was claimed in the last budget, was increased revenue from renegotiated pilot agreements. One of those entities that we should be going after is Norfolk Southern, which is an awful company in which I've litigated before. If that settlement doesn't go well for the city, and I don't know what their exposure is, I know for us at Central Office, it's large. So I think we need to expand what we look at. It's not just revenue coming in. I mean, there are savings that I know we were able to get at the school district by carving out our pharmaceutical benefits. And I don't really want to do a night culture sort of thing, other than it's just disturbing to hear how this meeting went today. And we'll continue to attend. I point out that we sued the city from 90 to 93 to prevent the transfer of the incinerator. So we've been at this for a while. I don't know how this thing spins out. And hopefully there's some lessons learned. On a positive note, I just would point out a couple of things that were raised in the presentation today by Mr. Graves. Harrisburg attends the HATS meeting. They were there last week. Really the input that occurred last week had to do with whether or not the goodwill building was in the floodplain. I'm saying to you, there's a lot of money at HATS that if we're going to coordinate, you can get transportation, I'd be more aggressive. I mean, if there's other boroughs and municipalities out there that are extremely aggressive, like Carlisle and Steel, although in Steel, I don't know how many beautification projects we can do. In terms of the housing, one of the things that they've discussed, which is being done a lot now, is workforce development. In other words, nothing's going to work here until you have an education system that attracts people. I mean, that's the bottom line. I've been in education all my life. It's a tough gig. I don't, right now during COVID at Central Office, our charter school bill went from 10 to 14 million. undocumented, we don't pay it, we lose ABE funding. So I would happen to think, although I'm not a fan of charter school, that everything's on the table. This does not work, and suburbs aren't that much better, to be honest. Central development in Susquehanna used to be the gold standards. They're in the middle of the pack now. So if there's something that we can do to, frankly, to get people to come in, it's gotta be with education. Workforce development, my plan was voted down, but essentially it's this: you guarantee people a discount to come to work for your district. You know, and we did it because I wanted to make sure that people who work at osteopathic or other school system could live in the district. You got the housing stock, I had the land, and I had a developer, and it went nowhere. I would also say, and you're here today, McCaskey is a pretty good urban school system. You can do this. I student taught at McCaskey. You can have a good school system in the city. It's not infeasible. To your point on food, I did a family food literacy program in the city for years. I just want to point out something that's really disturbing. When I was at Central Often, 1/3 of my students were overweight, 1/3 were obese, and I had 40% poverty. So what I'm saying, it's not just the food, but it's the food you consume. At free and reduced breakfast, I have to incentivize the kids to eat because their food palate is different. So, you know, there's a way to tackle the food issue, especially if you're going to participate with the schools, and you can do no cost. You can feed kids at no cost with the food bank throughout the summer. You know, these things are all doable, and have been done, but I would just end by saying, man, the neighborhood services is the Achilles heel here. It has been for some time. It's got to be fixed. I'm just echoing what you guys said today. And the final, like, tangential thought, we were at the Turnpike recently. They transacted $2.7 billion of business. I'm saying that because almost every Turnpike meeting, one of the things they're doing is turning over vehicles. They have one of the largest fleets in the state, and if I were you guys, they're 10 miles away, you may not be getting pristine first-time vehicles. Now, I don't know if you're getting trash trucks, ton of vehicles that I don't know what they dispatch with. We've been dealing with them for years on this. So just as an aside, again, I get trash trucks are expensive, fire trucks are expensive, I get that. Right down the road from you, a ton inventory of those vehicles.
Thank you, Aaron. These are good points. Brian, do you have anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, just, for the budget and for the economic development, when I talked about the need to borrow, we want to borrow. Here's the banking situation recently. Price can be pulled back. In fact, other serves, they all said that all the events price can be pulled back a lot across the board, and for regional banks, and there's other big banks. I don't see how some of these, I don't say proposals, but some of these are going to be easily fixed, especially if you have locked in pay and healthcare increases, so 3%, whatever the healthcare is. I mean, I don't know if there's a way to, I guess you can't renegotiate that, but keep it on. I don't know. I don't think you can count on borrow.
Thanks, Brian. That's good. Anybody else? Not your other room, do you have anything? Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you, everyone. We've covered a lot of ground. Appreciate that. We've got some homework to do. We'll get you a letter, and you're working with Jeffrey. We'll get out the section 203 report, and then we'll put April to bed. So motion to adjourn. Second.
Good night, everybody. 5:30 to 1 p.m.